violence and posed for pictures with the Capitol Police as other officers of the law stood idly by, watching violence unfold in front of them. What happened in the halls of Congress is a testament to the fact that we are changing the balance of power in this country. We knew there'd be a backlash. We knew that white supremacists with Trump support would attempt to steal what we worked so hard for. As a Georgian, again, I have to say, it was troubling and deeply painful to watch that happen right after such a victory that we had in Georgia. Trump has continually stoked the flames of violence, white supremacy, and terror, while we have focused on building power for all people and to realize a world where we're all safe. Soon after white supremacist insurrectionists stormed the U.S. Capitol, the Frontline, along with the WFP, M4BL, Rising Majority, and a ton of other partners, called to impeach, expel, and investigate. The movement for Black Lives is also calling for the abolition of the Electoral College. It's been a little over a month since then, and the fight for accountability is still ongoing. Trump was already impeached in the House with the support of 10 Republican members of Congress. And this week, the Senate kicked off the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Some are saying Congress shouldn't spend time on impeaching a president who's already out of office or looking backward at the events of January 6th. But how can there be any progress without accountability first? That's the question that we're all asking. There can be no reconciliation or compromise with Nazis, white nationalists, fascists, and those who enable them. Their ideology seeks power and demands surrender. We're pushing Congress to take every single action possible to hold their fellow members and Trump accountable. And we're not going to leave anything on the table. From a full-page ad in the New York Times to billboards going up in New York, Colorado, and Texas calling out members of Congress who are culpable for the insurrection, and calling for Marjorie Taylor Greene to be censured. Securing accountability for Trump and everyone else involved in the insurrection is a critical part of ensuring that an attack like this never happens again. Unity requires accountability, and we won't stop fighting until we see it through and get it done. And we need you to take action too. To hold Trump and his allies accountable for the violence we witnessed in January, please text EXPEL, EXPEL, to 30403. We need everyone here tonight to call your senators and demand that they vote to convict Trump in the impeachment trial. Please let me know in the Zoom chat if you're planning to call your senator and if you've already texted EXPEL to 30403 to get involved. Go ahead. On last week's call, we talked about the care and relief our communities need from the COVID pandemic. Please sign the People's Bailout petition using the link you see on your screen. Biden's relief package is moving through Congress, and this fight is still critically important. We need Congress to provide our people with real economic relief, and we need Congress to rescue workers and communities, not corporate executives. Please use the link on your screen to sign the People's Bailout petition. Now we're going to dive into the rest of our call. We have a powerful agenda tonight. We'll begin with a grounding from Paige Ingram from Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. Then we'll look to the past to understand the present with a presentation about the Wilmington coup of 1898 from special guest Christopher Everette, director and producer of Wilmington on Fire. We'll also look to the future, a future of racial justice with a panel discussion of movement leaders. But before we do that, when you call out white supremacy for what it is, there's always going to be some haters. The more powerful our work is, the more they come after us. We know it can be upsetting, but there's a good chance there'll be some trolls at this event tonight. If you see any hateful messages in the Zoom chat, please flood the chat with solidarity and other positive messages so that we can drown them out. I also want to remind everyone that interpretation is provided on this call. If you wish to hear the Spanish interpretation, please select the globe icon on your computer or the more or 3 dots icon on your tablet or smartphone. Select language interpretation and choose Spanish in the pop-up. I would say that in Spanish, but my Spanish is absolutely awful. I need interpretation. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to Paige Ingram for the grounding. Paige is a nomadic abolitionist creative, Currently rooted in the Twin Cities, Paige serves as community organizer and board member for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism and is a core team member of Project Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations. Paige.
Great. Sorry. Thank you for that. We're learning as we go along. So I'm Paige. I use she, her pronouns, and I was just really thanking everybody in the invitation to come on here. And I'm very excited for the programming tonight and very excited about grounding us today. So, I was thinking about this teaching that we're going to have and thinking about history. I happen to be like one of these like history nerds that is very committed to deep dives on the internet and in books. And I remember, I think I was at a training and I heard, I believe Mariam Kaba said that she does not believe that history repeats itself. I remember like immediately thinking, well, then what does history do? Like history must do something. It was like a little bit of a shock to the system, and it made me have to rethink my elevator speech about why being grounded in history is important. The other thing that I've been thinking deeply about is what the last 11 to 12 months has meant for us and how we are grounded in history. And what I mean by that is, in spite of everything around us and this constant pull for us to be present, and there's also an opportunity for us. Maybe it's not an opportunity, but maybe it's involuntarily. But I believe that we are really starting to see ourselves as historic relics. It's undoubtedly we have been living in historic times. I don't know how many times I've heard historic or unprecedented times describing what we are living through. And I think it's possible that one day we're going to be these historic relics that are part of, honestly, some of the most difficult chapters in our modern day history books, to be studied by very earnest and overzealous students like myself at one time, but in the future. But this is also an opportunity to reconsider our relationship, not just with history, but with this understanding of ancestry. That even for our youth, those of us who are fighting tooth and nail to combat climate change, the youngest of us have begun to understand ourselves as living ancestors. That somehow we are simultaneously living in the present and yet feeling anxious, ancient to ourselves. And how do we rectify this? And if history doesn't repeat itself, then what does this mean? What's our relationship to it? Well, I have some thoughts, and I just want to invite us all to consider just like a few things. When I think about what's in our history books, there's just so often a few names, a few people who are painted as heroes and villains, a powerful few. And yet there's an entire backdrop that is before and behind and creating and painting the picture of those few folks that end up in those history books and named. And that backdrop, that is people. History is not an entity in and of itself that is doomed to repeat itself, but history is very much the lessons and the actions that we are taking based off of the lessons that we've learned. We get to paint the backdrop. We get to move as a collective. Right now on this call, we've made a commitment to righting wrongs, to making systemic shifts. That's us. And it's powerful to imagine the power that we hold, that we don't have to all prop ourselves up to be the ones that will be named, but rather we are the ones that set the tone. We are the ones that paint the picture. And we are most definitely, most certainly the ones that we've been waiting for. And so I hope that some of these words will ground you and give you a sense of gratitude as we learn about the Wilmington coup and as we endeavor into learning more about Black people during this Black History Month as well. So I thank you and I appreciate you. I wish that I could really hear and see what's resonating, but I'll catch up in the chat. And I want to turn it over to the host.
Thank you so much, Paige. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. And we don't have to wait very much longer for tonight's program. I'm gonna turn it over to Ash-Lee Henderson to lead the conversation, where we're gonna reflect on the past, the present, and the future, and what it means for us to address white supremacy. As you're listening to these powerful movement leaders, if you haven't already, please text expel to 30403 to join our efforts to hold Trump and his allies accountable. We're pressuring senators to support impeachment, and we're targeting senators and members of Congress to investigate and expel members who are responsible for the attempted coup. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Ash-Lee Woodard Henderson, co-executive director of the Highlander Research and Education Center. Ash-Lee.
Thank you so much, Aimee, our fearless leader. I'm so grateful to you and the Working Families Party, the Movement for Black Lives, our United We Dream Action family, and everyone who makes up the Frontline. What an incredible history lesson we just got. And what a really critically important conversation we're about to have. So I hope you are grounded. I hope Paige got you good and ready to receive this incredible conversation with some of the most brilliant people that I know. So now I'm going to bring to the stage and set some tone for what we're going to discuss tonight. Some of my dearest colleagues and comrades in this work. I'm going to bring up Eric Ward, the great from Western State Center, who's been fighting for racial justice and racial equity in the Pacific Northwest. Talk about if there's like a stepsister to the South that is at the forefront, the tip of the spear in fighting against white nationalism and white supremacy. It is our comrades in the Pacific Northwest. So welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to bring up my sister, the Erin Heaney, from Showing Up for Racial Justice, the executive director of the organization. Erin is doing incredible work across the country, which you're going to hear about. So particularly if you are white folks looking for what white folks' next step should be, Erin is here to help give you some guidance. And last but certainly not least, I'm bringing up my sister, my friend, my colleague, my comrade, the Soya Jung from ChangeLab, who is also like, your mind is going to be blown from the information you're about to get on the call tonight. So if you thought you were going to get a boring rundown about white nationalism, or if you thought that white people would get centered in a way that wasn't actually talking about the disproportionate impact of white nationalism, white supremacy, and paramilitary forces on communities of color, if you thought that what you were going to get was a dry and boring lecture about white people, I apologize. That's not what the Frontline is going to give you. What you're going to get is brilliant assessment of the history that got us here, what's happening in the present, and our hopes for the future. So if you're ready for that, just tell me in the chat. Like, tell me that you're excited about these folks that are here. Tell me that you're ready, and we will go on and get going. And just to remind you, before we jump into this conversation, that if you want to actively be about this work on the demands of the front line, if you want to join us and be in this fight in the first 100 days of this new administration, I need you to text the word expel, EXPEL, to 30403 to join our efforts to hold Donald Trump and his allies accountable. All right, y'all, let's get into this conversation. You ready? All right. So first question. Looking back at history, we just heard this incredible story about the people power movement in Wilmington. What would you share with folks on this call, the hundreds and thousands of folks that are on this call? Tell me what you would tell any people in grassroots lingo to help them make sense of this moment, right? What would you tell regular folks to help them make sense of this moment? Maybe Eric, we'll start with you and then we'll kick it around.
Yeah, so it's good to see everyone. And I would just say this. Let's remember, it has been a hard years, but as my father reminds me, it's been a hard 96 years in America. And what we are dealing with, in short, that we need to understand is not a revolution. It is a backlash. It's a backlash to revolution, right? That is most signified and symbolized by the civil rights struggle in this country that started in the 1960s. This white nationalist movement is a backlash to that movement. It's a backlash that understands that white supremacy is falling and failing. So we should understand in many ways, as horrifying as this moment is, how serious as it is happening because of the victories and the successes that we have had for over 75 years. Our ancestors got us to this place. They fought, they suffered, they died. And our job is to make sure that we continue to unfold, as John Lewis said, moving democracy from a theory, right, to actuality. And that means right now, attending to the question of governance, getting elected officials to do their jobs. The real threat in this country is not merely white nationalism and these alt-right organizations. It is the failure of our democratic small d institutions to move beyond the unconscious bias that not only now leaves people of color, particularly Black and Indigenous folks, threatened, but leaves all of America threatened by these social movements. It is time to be serious, but look, don't despair. Despair is the tool of white nationalism. They want us to believe we're losing. They want us to believe that we are in the small minority. None of that is true. The real narrative is we are winning. Time and space is on our side. The agenda is on our side. The goal right now is to continue to move to the top of that mountain. We have promises to keep to those who came before us, right? And truths unfold for those who come after. Let's hold these institutions accountable. Let's make them uphold the idea of democracy by standing up against white nationalism. We do that by being heard, making calls, sending texts, and organizing in our communities. This is about building real power and not letting this white nationalist movement distract us from the issues of COVID that are happening in our community, healthcare, housing, right? This is our moment to govern. Let's show them what a real inclusive democracy looks like in America.
And get you an Eric Ward that can remind you that we might actually be winning. Thank you for that word, Eric Ward. Erin, I want to toss it to you. Tell me what you would tell regular, everyday people to help make sense of this moment.
I think history shows us over and over and over again that every time that people at the top are threatened, they double down on organizing white people. Every time they see successful multiracial coalitions, they double down on organizing white people. I think one of the things I was so struck by in the film, and I think we see over and over again in history, is that, white nationalist violence isn't random. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's organized, right? And it's the result of decades and decades of organizing, right, in majority white communities. And it's because it maintains power and money for those at the top, right? It serves a political purpose. And so, in Wilmington, they organized, they had, an electoral strategy. They had they organized the red shirts. They had the propaganda. There was a multi-pronged strategy to make sure that not too many other white folks joined the multiracial coalition that was successfully challenging power in their community. And I think, especially so many of us who are white are not taught the history of white organizing to make sure that our folks don't break rank, right? And there's a long lineage of that. And, I think we're seeing a lot of that happening right now in the communities that we live in. And I think when we understand history, we understand how we've been organized and how we've been used by those at the top. It allows us to make some sharp organizing interventions, which I know we're going to get to very soon.
Thank you so much, Erin. Appreciate you. Soya, you're up. Tell us how to make sense and meaning of this moment.
Hey, everyone. First of all, thank you to everyone who's put in the visible and invisible labor to make this call happen. And I co-sign what my comrades just said. I think, one thing I would say about making meaning of this moment is to clock and to acknowledge that when we build a multiracial base of people led by Black women who are grounded in local conditions and have been building the Southern Freedom Movement for generations, what happens? Well, Georgia teaches us that we win, right? At least this leg of the race. But I do want to say on this question of agency and sort of what roles we play, sometimes in this era, there's a way that non-Black people fetishize Black leadership, believing that there's something biologically or culturally distinct or kind of magical about Black people that makes us all need to listen to them all the time and just sort of wait for their instructions, right? I think that is deeply dehumanizing, and so we shouldn't do that. What we should acknowledge is that there is something distinct and historically rooted, as we just learned from Christopher, about the political conditions in which Black people in the United States live, the conditions that led to the 1898 attack, the conditions that led to the January 6th insurrection, the conditions that led to Tulsa, Oklahoma 100 years ago, right? And so these conditions are what forge political identities and drive political behavior. So this is especially true for Black women who form the strongest and most consistent base of Democratic support in terms of a voting base, not because of what the Democratic Party does, but because whether it's labor conditions, reproductive health, police violence, sexual violence, they understand that their interests lie in expanding rather than curtailing democracy. And guess what? I want us to all take away from this call that we should too, all of us. We should see that our interests lie in expanding multiracial, inclusive, participatory democracy, because no one is actually safe in the system. We've seen that from 465,000 COVID deaths in the United States, over 2 million dead worldwide, right? The denial of labor protections, Category 5 hurricanes year after year after year, right? There is no more evidence that we need at this point. This system has played out to its logical end. It has created a planetary and existential crisis. There's no more evidence that we need to know that when Black lives matter less, life itself matters less. So that's all. We all have skin in this game.
Yeah, if you had missed it, this was a moment where you were like, man, these are some of the most brilliant people in the game right now. So thank you all so much for helping us make meaning of this not really even just moment, but like where the pendulum is swinging in relationship to a Black-led, multiracial, multi-sector, working class-rooted fight for beloved community and social justice in our lifetime, right? That this is generations in the making that got us to this moment of not only what Eric mentioned in terms of our people power winning, but what Soya is saying around our need to be intentional about knowing the history of organizing, and Erin's point about not dodging the question of who is organizing white people is critical to our understanding of not only our past, but our present and our future. So I want to move us to the second question. And Erin, I want you to kick us off. Tell me what your organizational priorities or strategies are to address whiteness. You've given us a little bit of a history lesson. What are you doing in the here and now? And to what end? What are those priorities? What are those strategies? And for the sake of what? So Erin, kick us off, and then Eric, I'll come to you, and then Soya, I'll give you last word on this question.
Thanks, Ash. So SURJ, we think we got to organize our own, for those of us who are white. And for the sake of what? For the sake of winning on every issue that matters to any of us, because we know that whiteness has been one of the most powerful tools that those at the top have to make sure that those of us that are white do not join multiracial Black-led social movements that are going to get us all free. It's a tool to make sure that agenda can't win, right? So, I think last month, both the victory in Georgia and the insurrection on the 6th, shows that our people can go one way or the other, right? If we join up with powerful Black-led multiracial organizing, like we did in Georgia, we can contribute to winning powerful progressive victories, right? And when we don't tend to white supremacy in our own communities, it festers. It escalates violence, and it can completely undermine democracy, right? And so our people can go one way or the other. And so our mantra at SURJ is organize, organize, organize. Okay, so that looks like, in Georgia, when, visionary Black women said, we need to throw down hard because we know the Democratic Party is not going to deliver. It means we went to, rural, majority white parts of the state to knock doors and make sure that white voters showed up at the polls to deliver, to contribute to delivering that victory. It means when our local communities are having debates and fights over police budgets, that we knock doors in majority white, parts of our communities to make sure that our people show up at those fights as well, right? It means when the Klan starts knocking doors in rural Tennessee, that we go out the next day and knock those doors and talk to people, engage with them, and to invite them into concrete fights to improve housing, right, in their communities. It means when these guys come back from the Capitol to our communities that are majority white, and they try to run for sheriff or local, city council, that we don't let them win, that we throw down on campaigns that don't allow them to further take over parts of the government, right? So I think this is the work of organizing. And, I think something that's been really core to our strategy at SURJ is getting really clear on which white people we think we need to be organizing. We all have a role to play, and we think it's critical that we are organizing in white communities that have the most to gain from a change in the status quo, right? That for us, that means poor and working class white folks. It means white folks in the South. It means organizing in rural communities. Not because these folks are the most racist, but because we know that these folks have the most to gain from a change in status quo and from joining a multiracial movement. So yes to, holding people accountable, and I think we see our work is also building a bigger we and contributing to that multiracial movement, fighting for democracy and all the things that matter to so many of our communities.
So critically important, right? Not conceding the territory of white people to the right, to nationalism, to right-wing populist movements, and actually putting in the flesh and the soul to make sure that our people are seen and organized to us. Thanks so much for that, Erin. Eric, I'm tossing it to you. Tell me about your organizational priorities, and for the sake of what?
Yeah. So Western State Center engages around the idea that the best defense for racial and gender equity is democracy. We mean real democracy, right? People-centered, transparent, right? Accountable democracy. And, sometimes democracy, it's been misused a lot. But we should be clear in this country that what democracy exists in large part because Black folks struggled for it, right? And we should not be so quick, right, to turn our backs on what our folks have struggled and built in the society. We have a long way to go. And Western State Center believes that there can be Black-centered and Black-led multi-racial organizing. We reject this idea, right, from foundations and others, right, that Black folks can only organize ourselves. We say, no, look, we can build these movements. We understand, right? We may not be alone in that understanding, but we have a real role to play and we have a track record to point to. So Western State Center focuses primarily on trying to educate folks around the white nationalist social movement, right? And how to disrupt it. The main reason is both a moral, right, and a theory of change. In what world would we leave our opposition, a huge constituency to recruit from, without being contested? It's simply not going to happen. And that's what we focus on here in the Pacific Northwest. We understand that the work of Black folks and other communities of color and workers and women and the LGBTQ community has transformed this country in some significant ways. And one of the ways that it has transformed is that there are more white people, right, by percentage, not just numbers, right, who support Black Lives Matters today than supported Martin Luther King Jr. in his entire lifetime, right? And that means, right, that we are shifting how this country understands race and how it understands liberation and how it understands the future. So we work with DEI trainers. We invest in them heavily to make sure that they are more aligned with movements, right, rather than corporate interests. We work with small base community organizations around our region and around the country who are trying to figure out how they keep their communities safe from the backlash of hate crimes and hate organizing as they do their liberation work. We work with white singer-songwriters, right, who are out there touring around the country, speaking to their base supporters around how they tell stories about this moment. We think engagement is important, and we think there's no terrain that Black America can't function on around dismantling white supremacy and the white nationalism backlash that's come from our work. We think it's critically important to be engaged in communities. If folks go to our website at westernstatecenter.org, right, you can sign up for our Democracy Alert, right, which is a bi-weekly newsletter that gives you the what's what of what's happening around the country in terms of white nationalism. You can get toolkits such as our Confronting White Nationalism in Schools, which we're providing to educators. Over 6,000 have been distributed around the country to educators in nearly every state. There are things that we can do, right, as we build towards racial equity in this country, as we build towards real democracy. And we think that those white folks who want to be part of that future America have space in our movement. And we're trying to find them, we're trying to organize them, right? And we want white nationalism to know, right, it doesn't have ownership, right, over folks who are white. None of us were here when this country got built, right? None of us are responsible for that. What we're responsible for is how we move this country, how we move our values forward now. And that's what we're focused on at Western State Center.
So much gold and so many tools offered by Eric Ward in the Western State Center. In a particular note, this white supremacist nationalist paramilitary upsurge that we've seen, I think, is really critical to remember this point that Eric made, that it's in response to us, right? And they only respond if we're on the upswing, if we're winning, if we're powerful, right? Soya, tell us what you got.
Oh, wow. Well, your question, I think, was what's the priority and for the sake of what? And I would just say, like, prioritize local organizing and power building at local and state levels so that we can build durable power nationally. and not just get people elected, but hold them accountable. And for all the reasons that Erin and Eric just laid out, right? You know, I also cut my political teeth in the Pacific Northwest, which is a predominantly white region and will be continue to be majority white in 2050 or whenever the white apocalypse is supposed to happen. So one purely pragmatic thing, you know, as kind of Eric alluded to, is that we can't win in places like that without a multiracial coalition. And maybe more importantly, which Eric also alluded to, is that when we concede, Erin also said this, you know, when we concede any constituency, right, we leave them ripe and available for our opposition to organize, and they will. So that's one answer. We're building power, and we should build power to win. And then another is that, you know, I deeply believe in our shared humanity. I think that for white people, I think about, you know, the civil rights legend Ruby Sales, who recently in interviews said, you know, white people are experiencing a spiritual crisis, and, you know, witnessing higher mortality rates, deaths of addiction, of depression, et cetera, deaths of despair that have taken hold in the white population. And how do you narrate that in a white supremacist society? That's not supposed to happen. Right? And then she talks about the power of asking, where does it hurt? And I think that is really important, not just for white people, but for all of our organizing, because we have to figure out how to construct new social relations, how to build our shared humanity around our kind of rawness, right? Around the ways in which the system has harmed us. And in fact, see each other as kin and not rivals, and see that white supremacy actually does not give a shit about white people, pardon my French, ultimately. But I think that part of this is, you know, I'm not saying like spend all our time and resources in kind of redeeming or renovating the kind of most extreme, the people who, you know, were part of the January 6th insurrection necessarily. I think we do need to understand that when we're organizing not around some flimsy sense of guilt or shame, but actually a shared interest, right? If you can see yourself in, for example, the Breathe Act will require a whole new workforce of people, a whole new investment into the commons, a whole new set of social relations that is fundamentally feminist, all of these things. And if you can see your interest in that, which you should, and we all should, then that is the basis, right, for you to throw down around this multiracial movement for democracy.
That's a word. Hashtag have you read it? The Breathe Act. My goodness. Thank you, Soya. All right. So I've asked you about making sense of the moment. And I've asked you about your organizational priorities and strategies to address whiteness and why those are your strategies and your priorities. I want to wrap this conversation up with asking you again a different version of the why. Tell me how addressing whiteness will benefit frontline communities. I think you all have like spoken some directly to it, right? We've talked about like, well, if we don't go get them, the right certainly will, white nationalists certainly will, if we can see territory, et cetera. But for those of us that are from marginalized and targeted communities, what's at stake, right? How will my life, my family's life, the people that love and look like me, live different lives on the front lines if we address this question? Anybody can kick us off.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say this, look, the truth is this, right? We can say we've seen this all before, and we certainly have seen aspects of this before, but we have not, our generation has not had to deal with this level, right, of racist reaction. And the reason we need to pay attention to it, right, is because at the end of the day, right, our job is to crush white supremacy. And crushing white supremacy means ultimately, right, And I'm not saying we're there today, but we should understand, right, that the strongest power of white supremacy is the false notion of the biological definition of race, right? There is no biological definition of race. It is a white supremacist construct. And so as we break the pillars of white supremacy and it crumbles, we are going to have to deal with the fact, right, that race is a social construct. And in building a country, right, it can't be built in the idea of racial solidarity. We are in a moment where we can prove Black solidarity without reliance on racial solidarity. And one of the ways that we do that, right, is by understanding that the way that we follow through on our self-interest for our own communities, right, is by building the strongest small d democratic, I got to keep saying that, small d democratic space that we can. And that means working with other communities, including white folks. This idea that white folks are somehow inherently problematic isn't true. It's white supremacy. And so what I say is the benefit is this. The benefit is that once we organize, and there are white folks who see themselves as part of a multiracial democracy, once we figure out, right, how to ally and work in multiracial context with those folks, what we will figure out, right, is that the ability of that white nationalist movement to interfere with the project of democracy, of inclusive democracy, will begin to wane. The more folks that we create space for is the less folks that they have. People don't want to walk into their world of dystopian violence, right? People are looking for an alternative. But if we don't create that alternative, who's going to create it? Now, I'll just say this, Ash-Lee, before I be quiet, right? Not everyone has to do this, right?
That's right.
But what we can't do is undermine those who are trying to do that work. It's part of our equation in terms of how we get free.
That's right.
Absolutely. Know your role and play it excellently for the sake of our collective liberation. Thank you for that word, Eric. All right, who's next? Soya, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think one of the reasons is that, whiteness is what has held together this system of incredible and growing and predatory and voracious inequality, right? And so, like Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, capitalism requires inequality and racism enshrines it. I think when we leave one particular racialized group of people out of our racial justice, multiracial organizing, we risk, right, perpetuating a kind of system of supremacy. My dear friend and comrade Trishella Deb said to me once a while ago that the task of people of color in the 21st century is to learn how to and demonstrate how to govern without supremacy. I think, the other thing that I think about, and I just want to mention this before we wrap up, is that, let's not forget that we are facing the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in modern history. People are saying between 30 trillion and $68 trillion, right, in the next 30 years. So one thing I would want to leave us all with, and I don't have the answer for this, but how can we plan for the long term to build a platform, a multiracial movement that uses those resources to build and demand a redistributive economics and political system that is inclusive, to basically usher in a brand new era of like democratic renewal that is multiracial fundamentally. Like, I just wonder about that. That's a lot of money, y'all. So anyway, that's all I got.
And that is plenty. I mean, Soya, that's trillion with a T. That's trillion with a T. More money, and more money than probably any of us have ever even imagined could be possible. And profit that was created, was generated by us. It's our money, right? So let's go get it. All right, Erin Heaney.
And
tell me.
Like the young people, I was just gonna say, I'm sorry, Ash. I was just gonna say also the young people are dissatisfied. They're not like their parents. They are more dissatisfied. They're more interested in social justice. So they may not invest that shit into like market systems, speculative finance, all that stuff.
That's right. And if they're looking for a place of belonging, we should make sure that we've built a movement where we can direct them. Right? Right. All right, Erin, we're going to give you the last answer on this question. How will it benefit frontline communities to pay attention to your strategies and priorities?
I'm going to answer this question with a caveat, which is that I deeply believe and appreciate the point that Soya made earlier about white supremacy not working for white folks either, but that's a whole other webinar. And I think we've got, at SURJ, we talk a lot about mutual interest, that we actually have a stake in destroying this too. So, and just straight up, I love this question because, I think that white communities are one of the biggest barriers to winning the transformative liberatory agenda that has already been set by the hosts of this call tonight, by the Movement for Black Lives, by Working Families Party, by United We Dream Action Fund. We have made enormous progress, and there are many of us that have joined multiracial coalitions, and yet still too many white folks are silent and on the sidelines about issues that matter. Too many of us are still antagonistic to an agenda that would actually improve our own lives. And so we don't need to win over all white folks, but I want to make the case that we do need more folks than we've got now. And, our work doesn't need to be about, SURJ's work isn't about setting the agenda, right? It's about us doing our part to build power in our communities, to show up alongside all of our partners who have set this liberatory agenda that is going to get us all free. So this is not a new call either. This is something that the Black liberation movement in the 1960s called on us to do. So I think if you're a person interested in this project and want to do some of this organizing with SURJ, I'd encourage you to sign up. You can sign up for our email list, and we will put you to work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to this incredible panel, my friends, my colleagues, my comrades in this work. Y'all give it up to them in the chat. Definitely check out their organizations. Again, Western State Center, ChangeLab, and Showing Up for Racial Justice. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that because we know that there was not enough time to have this conversation, we are committed to, as organizations, the Highlander Center, Western State, SURJ, and ChangeLab, to have another conversation, a longer conversation about these questions of whiteness in this moment. So be on the lookout for registration information to come and join us on that call. And with that, I will toss you back into the capable hands of my comrade, Aimee. Thank y'all so much.
Oh, thank you. So let's just take a minute to think about what we just did tonight. We had a beautiful grounding with Paige where we were reminded that we're living ancestors. We're the ones that we've been waiting for. And as James Baldwin once said to Margaret Mead, you and I are history. After that, we got a deeply prescient history lesson from Christopher about the Wilmington coup of 1898, really like putting some things into perspective. And then we finished with an invigorating conversation with movement leaders, Ash-Lee, Eric, Erin, and Soya. Thank y'all so much. That really challenged us to get and stay organized, using history as our lesson, our goading, and our weapon. Anti-racism is a verb, y'all. So now, before we close, please remember, pressure your senators to support impeachment and reach out to senators and members of Congress to demand impeach, expel, and investigate. You can text expel to 30403 to join this effort. You can do it right now if you haven't already. For the white folks in the audience, I want to encourage you to join SURJ, to show up for racial justice. And for everyone else, or everyone in general, don't miss On the Frontline next Wednesday, February 17th, to hear about evictions and the economy. Thank you, everybody. Good night.